Hello, everyone. Welcome to the SR1 Coastal Resiliency Study. My name is Jim Pappas. I'm the Director of Transportation Resiliency and Sustainability at the Delaware Department of Transportation. And we want to thank you for taking your time this evening to sit and listen to us as we talk about the planning study that we have initiated for the SR1 corridor. Next slide, please. We want to start tonight's session with an opening from DelDOT's Cabinet Secretary, Secretary Nicole Majeski.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Majeski, Secretary of the Delaware Department of Transportation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual public meeting for the SR1 Coastal Corridor Resiliency Study. One of our goals at DelDOT is to examine the impacts climate change and sea level rise are having on our transportation infrastructure and incorporate resilient and sustainable mitigation measures in the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of our projects. As the lowest lying state, creating resilient infrastructure in the face of roadway flooding is a challenge. We have been and continue to be challenged by frequently flooded roadways, even on sunny days. The SR1 corridor between Dewey Beach and the Maryland state line is particularly vulnerable, with effects coming from both the ocean as well as the bay. This planning study will allow the department to develop short and long-term solutions to help protect this important roadway for both the safety of the traveling public and the economic stability of the state. I look forward to your participation tonight and want to thank you for your time and engagement in our meeting. I also want to thank our staff that has been working on this very important initiative. Thank you all very much.
Thank you, Secretary Majeski. So first thing we want to do tonight is to do a round of introductions for the team that's been working on this project and will work on this project going forward. So again, my name is Jim Pappas. I'm the Director of Transportation Resiliency here at the Delaware Department of Transportation. With us tonight is Stephanie Johnson, who is our Assistant Director for Transportation Resiliency and Sustainability. And DelDOT has partnered with two wonderful organizations to help us with this project. We have the team of AECOM, and REMLine. And representing AECOM this afternoon is Joe Hosty, who is the project manager, who will be giving part of the presentation this evening. Kara Murphy is on here as well. She's a marine structural engineer and will present some information. And Marge Quinn, also with AECOM, is the planning manager that has been involved in this with the public outreach. And we also want to thank REMLine for their involvement in this project. And Daniel Lloyd is on our call this evening as well, who is the Outreach and Engagement Director. Again, this is a team that has started this work and will continue to work on this work. So as we move forward in this project, you will see our faces many more times in the future. So we just want to introduce everybody so that you knew who the team was. Next slide, please. So this afternoon, for the first session, we were going to go over various things here on the slide. So first, we want to talk about what the expectations are. And again, we appreciate your time this evening being involved in this workshop. We want to talk about why we're doing this project. Those who are familiar with the area probably understand or maybe have been unfortunately impacted by the events that we have along there. So you have a good idea of why we're doing this. But we wanted to provide a little bit more information on that. We want to go through the study areas because, again, this is from Dewey Beach all the way to Fenwick Island. As you know, that's quite a long segment. And there's a little bit different topography along that route. So we'll show you how we've broken that down. We'll talk briefly about some modeling that has been done to kind of replicate some of the storm events and how it impacts the infrastructure along there. Talk a little bit about potential protection and mitigation measures we can use along this corridor. Talk about some of the evaluation criteria that we can use, and then we'll talk about what the path forward is. Again, this is the initial discussion. We know there will be many more public engagement as we move forward, and we're really looking forward to that. And we will also make reference to how you can stay involved. There are going to be a number of ways that the community members can continue to stay involved. And then at the end, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, we thank you for your time, and I'm going to turn it over to Joe Hosty. Again, AECOM is the consulting firm that DelDOT has contractually worked with, and we would look forward to continuing our work with them. So Joe, take it away.
Thanks, Jim. Marge Quinn, could you please go through the workshop expectations?
Sure, Joe.
Well, tonight, as Jim has mentioned, this is our first public workshop, and we will have more to follow. So why are we here tonight? Well, we're kicking off the study in terms of its public engagement process, and we're here to start the conversations and to understand community needs. In terms of how things will work tonight, we'd like to be able to provide comments or ask questions. So during the meeting tonight, during any time, you can use the meeting's Q&A function to ask questions or even just to offer a comment. Anytime after tonight, please visit the website that's been created for the study, and you can fill out an online comment form, which is available on the project's website. And also at any time, you can send an email to dotpublic@delaware.gov. And so that with that, Joe, I'm going to turn it back to you for the study expectations.
Thanks, Marge. So now I want to get into the study expectations and what to expect from the study. On the screen, I have a timeline of the study. So the initiation of the study began back in early 2021 when DelDOT submitted a Fema advance application to study the resiliency of SR1. DelDOT was announced that they were awarded that grant in early spring of 2021, and the money became allocated and ready to use and start the study at the fall of 2022. From that point on, DelDOT began to, along with AECOM and NREC, began to gather background information and begin doing some of that modeling effort that Jim alluded to. Right now, we're standing in the timeline for the public workshop number 1. So this is the time we want to begin to get the public engaged and make you aware of what we're doing out here and seek that important input on the study that we're doing and moving forward. Later this year, AECOM is going to be submitting the draft technical report to DelDOT for their review, which then upon their review and approval, we'll be moving to the public workshop number 2 to present a lot of those findings that we're going to be talking about tonight. We're going to take the comments from public workshop number 2 and incorporate that into that final technical report. From that point, DelDOT is then going to move towards submitting a grant application for future breakout projects and studies. As you can see, the timeline continues past 2024 with future study and breakout projects. This is just the very beginning. The overall SR1 corridor resiliency is going to be a much longer, greater project and study moving forward. One of the big takeaways I want everyone to have from tonight is this is a high-level planning study that we're beginning right now. It is not a design project, but what we're looking to do from this study is begin to break out future projects, which will be identified as part of this project and prioritized for moving forward. So now I want to spend a little time going through the purpose and need. So what is the purpose of the study? Well, one of the main purposes is to establish existing future conditions as a result of coastal storms and flooding and also the bay, and get a baseline of where we are. Then we want to take that baseline and identify a range of potential mitigation alternatives to help combat those future conditions. We also want to establish criteria to evaluate the potential mitigation alternatives. And Kira's going to be spending some time going through the evaluation criteria, and that's an area we're definitely seeking a lot of public input for tonight to make sure that we're looking at the locations correctly and getting in the opinions of the public. From that, we want to evaluate the conceptual mitigation alternatives based off those established criteria that we went through. Of course, one of the main purposes of the study is to work with the public, you, and the stakeholders to determine preferred alternatives. So why is this study needed? So SR1 is the primary evacuation route for Bethany Beach, South Bethany Beach, Fenwick Island, and Ocean City, Maryland in the case of any emergency, such as a nor'easter, flooding, a hurricane, or any other natural disaster. So it's critical to Delaware to keep that open from an emergency standpoint. One of the key elements is if closure of SR1 occurs between Indian River Bridge and Dewey Beach, it results in an 18-mile detour, which during the summertime and depending on the traffic can equate to more than an hour of additional travel time. which presents a major concern to emergency response and also getting people out of the area. Another need for the study is we want to improve the overall resiliency of SR1, so it stays open more often, providing that direct route of travel. Also, the more resilient it is, the less money the state of Delaware is going to have to spend on maintenance costs. This study also supports the 2016 DEMA Multi-Jurisdictional All-Hazard Mitigation Plan and the 2018 State of Delaware All-Hazard Mitigation Plan. Both those plans identified coastal flooding as a #1 hazard to the state of Delaware. And they called on DelDOT to look in the state of Delaware to look at ways to address the flooding. And this study is one of the steps in doing that. SR1 is vital to the economic well-being of the area and the state as a whole. We want to make sure that we can keep those resort areas open, the restaurants, the businesses, and allow people get their homes and bring in the income into the state. SR1 provides that link to those looking to visit our Delaware beaches and provides year-round travelers and residents ease of access to the coastal community. So now, what is our study area? Just so everyone knows where we're actually looking at. We're looking at the 6 miles of State Route 1 coastal highway. Our northern limit's the Dewey Beach. To be more precise, it's the New Orleans Street, which you can see in the breakout map. For a landmark, it's a street just south of the starboard. The limits extend down to the Maryland state line. We are wanting to break out this study area into multiple segments, since this whole stretch is not the same. So we want to look at it in multiple segments. So what I'm going to show is the different segments that we're using for a study area. So we have the 6 segments moving north from left to right is going from north to south. So the first segment's at Dewey Beach, and we extend down to the Fenwick Island. We base these segments off the surrounding terrain conditions in the area. This helps us look at the different mitigation alternatives, and we still can break these up into more subsets. From a modeling standpoint, we have more segments in this, but this is for the overall mitigation alternatives we're trying to look at. So segment 1 is the Dewey Beach area, with residential both on the eastern and western side, and the ocean, of course, on the east side. As you move south of Dewey from Dewey to just south of the Indian River Inlet Bridge, you're looking at much more beach and vegetation, with the ocean on the east and your bay on the west side. We want to make sure we take in that area in consideration for those. Also, there's some homes and some businesses in that area, but not as many as the other segments. Segment 3, we're going from south of the Indian River Inlet Bridge to the Bethany Beach area, North Bethany Beach area, which is residential on the east and vegetation on the western side. Then segment 4 is the Bethany Beach area, which is more residential on both sides of the road and with not as much of the bay influence, more of a land area behind SR1. So we move to segment 5, which is between Bethany Beach and Fenwick. We get back into that more beach vegetation with the ocean on the east and the bay on the west. As we move further south to our end of our limits, we're looking at Fenwick Island, which is both residential on the east and the western side. So this is a map of the elevations that we've plotted out for the study area, mostly along the main line of Route 1. As you can see, it varies from 12 feet all the way down to less than 2 feet. So on our left-hand side, which is our northern limit at Dewey, we're between that 12 to 4 feet area. So we go from Dewey to just south of Indian River Inlet Bridge. We're looking at anywhere from below 2 feet to 6 feet in elevation. As we move into the south of Indian River Inlet Bridge into northern Bethany, we're looking at 2 feet to 8 foot in elevations. Bethany Beach area is one of our higher areas, which isn't a lot. It's from 8 to 4 feet. And then between Bethany and Fenwick, we're looking at between 4 and 2 feet of elevation. And then the Fenwick Island, we're looking at a little bit more than 4 feet. So overall, this segment of roadway is very low lying, which makes it exposed to coastal flooding easily and having the road become overtopped. So one of the areas we're going to be looking at, I'm going to touch on this briefly, is the coastal models. The coastal models they're going to be used to establish existing and the future conditions. The future conditions important because we want to look at potentials of sea level rise and also increase hurricanes and storm events and increase frequency of those events and make sure that we plan for that future. We're looking in these coastal models, we're looking at both a regional and a local model, and I'll be going through those a little bit more. And then we're also looking at the sediment transport model. The sediment transport model, that's important for us because that looks at the movement of the sands and potential erosion of our dunes that help protect Route 1 in our coastal area. So we want to see if those will be able to withstand the storm event, if they're going to be there to hold back the water or not, and also to look at future mitigation alternatives to see if they can withstand it. We're also going to analyze the ocean side and the Bayside separately. The Bayside also results in overtopping of the road and flooding, so we want to make sure we take that into account too, not just the ocean. So our regional model, which I have a little arrow pointed to our project site. So as you can see, this is a much larger area going from the Caribbeans all the way up into Canada. This helps us look at the hurricane best track and synthetic models to generate cyclones, look at those. Also look at tidal information and other spatial attributes. The information we pull out of this really helps us to build our local model. So we get our water levels and our wave information from that. So moving into our local model, which is more in the Delaware Beach area, and we're looking at simulating wave heights at the study area sites under different scenarios. We're going to use the outputs from the regional models, the water levels from the FEMA flood insurance study, extreme wave conditions from NOAA, extreme wind condition based on local airport wind stations, and we're going to incorporate the sea level rise into our local model. The outputs that we're looking to get from this is the local wave conditions for different scenarios and wave information for sediment transport simulation. I'm now going to be turning it over to Kira to begin going through some examples of primary flood mitigation.
Great, thanks, Joe. So to protect SR1, the design team is evaluating the following primary flood mitigation measures. Starting from the top left-hand side of the screen, we have the exposed flood wall. This is typically a vertical barrier built to retain floodwaters. They're often made of concrete and can be clad with many different materials for visual enhancement. Moving to the right, we have the buried flood wall or structural dune. These are typically made from concrete or steel sheet piles as pictured, and are then covered with soil or sand to form a berm or a dune. Next, we have short-term deployables, which are temporary solutions to provide flood protection. There are two types of temporary deployables. The first include deployable measures that are stored off-site and then brought on-site prior to a storm. Some examples of these are water-filled bladder barriers or L-shaped barriers. The second type are deployable measures that are brought on-site and then remain there on a day-to-day basis. Some examples of these are sandbags or geotextile filled bags. On the bottom left of the screen, we have an example of permanent deployables. Permanent deployables are flood barriers that provide longer-term flood protection and have permanent foundations. They are designed to maintain pedestrian and vehicular access during dry conditions and are only deployed before storm events. The most popular types of permanent deployables include flip-up gates, swing gates, and sliding gates. And finally, we have raised and rerouted roadways, which can be used to preserve evacuation routes. Next slide, please. We are also considering secondary flood mitigation measures, which can provide added benefits and may be used in conjunction with the primary measures to create a comprehensive flood protection system. On the left, we have living shorelines, which are bioengineered natural infrastructure solution that can assist in shore stabilization and can protect against erosion. They also have wildlife and ecological benefits. On the right, we have revetments, which are sloping structures made out of stone, often used on coastlines, and can provide slope stabilization, erosion protection, and also energy absorption. Next slide, please. Once we identify potential mitigation measures for the different segments that Joe described earlier in this presentation, we will then evaluate them based on the following evaluation criteria. So starting with the level of flood protection, essentially we'll look at what elevation can each mitigation measure protect up to. The construction cost, how expensive will it be to build different options? The operation and maintenance cost, once built, how expensive will it be to maintain the different mitigation measures over their life cycle? Physical constraints, which include time as well as existing conditions, such as the right of way or existing commercial and residential infrastructure in the area. A benefit cost ratio, which will compare future risk reduction benefits to the cost. Environmental effects, so the benefits and impacts to the natural environment, including carbon reduction and wildlife habitats. The community effects, benefits and impacts to the already built environment. If there's traffic impacts, travel time impacts, and the general impacts of the project during construction and after on the community. And last but not least, aesthetics and visual impacts. Visual impacts the proposed options may have for the community and the general public in the area. Now I'm going to turn it back to Joe for the next steps.
Thanks, Kira. So the next steps, where are we going to go from here? So we're going to continue with the model of the following storm events for each of the 6 segments. We're going to look at the 10-year storm event for existing and future conditions. Then we're going to look at the 100-year storm event for existing and future conditions and see how those evaluation criteria, how those various mitigation measures stand up to those evaluation criteria. We're going to perform erosion analysis. We're going to hold that second public workshop in early 2023 to present those findings and to begin further communications and input from the public. We're going to prepare the report of the findings, and we're going to prioritize segments and mitigation alternatives. We're going to identify and submit grant applications to advance the study recommendations into projects for design. I'm now going to turn it back over to Marge to go over how to stay involved.
Thanks, Joe. So we have 3 primary mechanisms by which we would like the public to stay involved. The first is to visit the study's website. That will contain tonight's meeting slides as well as our question and answer responses in written form. And it will also contain a recording from tonight's presentation, the actual live webinar that's happening right now. On the website, you can complete an online comment form. And in addition to that, you can include your email address, and that will make sure that you're added to the study's mailing list, and you'll be advised of new and upcoming public workshops. And then the third mechanism is to attend our next virtual public workshop, which Joe mentioned will be in the winter, and that will be virtual as well. So with that, I think I'm going to be turning it back to Jim Pappas.
Great. Thank you, Marge. So again, we thank you for your time. So at this point, you've kind of heard from the team. And again, this was a very high level overview of kind of what we've done to this point, why we did this, what we've done to this point, and kind of the steps forward. Now we want to hear from you as the community. So if you have any questions, please go ahead and submit them through the Q&A function, and we'll be happy to answer any questions. And again, as Marge just mentioned, we encourage folks to reach out, take a look at that website. There's information. Tonight's slides will be there, the recording will be there, and contact information as well. So if friends of yours or family of yours were not able to join us tonight, either for this session or the session that we're going to have at 6 p.m., the information will be available so that they can look at it at a later date, or if you'd like to go back and re-look at it, again, it'll be saved for you. So at this point, any questions, if you could please feel free to go ahead and drop those in the Q&A, and we'll be happy to answer those questions.
I'm going to start reading out our questions that we received so far. Our first is regarding wildlife. So the question is, how will the Diamondback terrapins and other wildlife be able to traverse from the bay to the ocean area?
Okay, great question. So the ecology down there is obviously very important, and even today we work very closely with DENREC, the Division of Natural Resources, on many projects, maintenance along there to ensure that there's a safe habitat and safe crossings along there. We have engaged with DENREC in this project already, and we certainly plan to continue that engagement. So once as we're kind of going through the modeling that Joe mentioned and the potential resolutions that Kira mentioned, before we obviously get too far along in that point, we would reach out to DENREC and other interested stakeholders to better understand the ecology along there and ensure that everything that we're doing along there not only does not adversely affect that, but can also look to improve that. So, we can look at maybe living shoreline type projects, things like that, that are beyond just the physical roadway infrastructure, and kind of combine the gray infrastructure of concrete and steel with green infrastructure along the actual, both on the Bayside and on the ocean side. So it's certainly something that is of utmost importance to this team. And so we will certainly, again, work with DENREC and other interested stakeholders before we get too far along. So those will be the kind of things that we'll want to hear as you see kind of as we're moving along in the planning development, like Joe mentioned. That's what we want to share with the community, get your input and find out, what would be the best options.
All right. The next question is from a resident of South Bethany. They are asking if they could get a copy of these materials for the town council to review.
Yes, so absolutely. Again, as Marge mentioned, everything that we're doing here will be uploaded onto the website. And we've also discussed as a team that, it might be good for us to go out and do some road shows, if you will, to each of the communities along there. We're kind of doing a very long stretch here, right? From, as Joe mentioned, it's 6 miles from Dewey all the way down to Fenwick Island. And we know there are individual communities along that corridor that might have, different concerns or different asks that, we would be able to answer. So we kind of envision that beyond just these kind of global webinars here that we're doing or virtual meetings that we're doing, we will probably come and meet with a town. So for the leadership of those towns that are on this, feel free to reach out to me, and we'd be happy to come out, whether it's, meeting with the towns, the mayors, any elected officials along there, and again, kind of have an individual discussion for your communities. Again, we'll talk globally, but we know a lot of this is kind of of local interest. So we're happy to come out and discuss that, because again, going back to what Joe showed with the kind of the timeline, we've got a little bit of time here. We've done a little bit of work to get to this point. We're here. We want to hear from you, hear input that can kind of direct us in our next course and moving forward. But again, we certainly have time that we can reach out to the communities and hear from you and kind of sit down one-on-one with you.
Okay. Our next question, is any part of the study involving Back Bay flooding, for example, in Bethany Beach from the Bethany Loop Canal?
Okay. Joe, I'm going to maybe ask if you can, from the modeling standpoint, I know you guys are looking at that, or maybe even Kira, if you could maybe go into a little bit of detail on that one.
I know we're looking at the Bethany area. I would have to look into to see if that exact portion is in the model. Kira, do you know?
I'd also have to take a double check at the model to see.
Okay. So thank you for that question. So we'll verify that. And again, as was mentioned, all the Q&As will be provided in the website as well for the project. So apologize, we will get an answer for you. So thank you for the question.
Okay. When do you anticipate the construction of any solutions to begin? In other words, when will the studies lead to solutions which can be deployed?
Well, again, this is a planning study at this point, so we're a little while out. Again, going back to Joe's slide, which kind of showed the timeline. So we received a grant to get to this point with the planning study, and we will go after future grants. The actual construction is, I can't give you an exact time, like a calendar year or anything like that, but it's going to be several years. What I can tell you though, is that's going to kind of, I'll say is the long term. I want to give credit to our maintenance division in Sussex County because, and again, if you're familiar with that area, they've done a wonderful job of being able to keep that road open during most storm events. You know, when there's significant events, yeah, it might get shut down for a little while. And so the department has the flexibility in the short term to go out there and kind of, you know, build the pavement up a couple inches at a time. That's a short-term solution. We know it's not long-term. That's why we've initiated this study. So if we see in the short term that this project, this planning discussion is not, you know, is going to be a little while out, but yet we're seeing concerns along the infrastructure of Route 1, we can always go out there and quickly put a project together to literally put a couple inches of asphalt out there. And again, that will tie us over. As a matter of fact, you know, down around the Indian River Inlet Bridge, just to the south of the Indian River Inlet Bridge, talking with our maintenance group, there's an area down there that they're still seeing a little bit of water. So we're going to put a contract together, or a contract has been put together for going out there and kind of, again, doing a quick couple inch asphalt overlay just to raise it, move the water off the road for a short-term fix. Our district is well aware of the work that we're doing on this project. And again, they're going to be intimately involved in it as we move forward as well.
Okay, there was a request to show the website address again. I put that in the chat. So all attendees should be able to see that and click on that. Right. Next question regarding sea level rise. How will sea level rise be integrated into the FEMA modeling?
Joe, if you can you
Yes, Jim, I'd be happy to answer that question. So we're looking at the sea level rise, we're taking that into account, and that's going to be built into the 2750 out year model that we're going to be looking at. And for that, we're looking at a sea level rise of 2.63 feet in that area. And that's going to be built into the model. So we're going to anticipate the ocean be rising that amount, and that's going to be in our out year model.
Okay. Next question, would mitigation measures, I believe the question is, would mitigation measures be put into place just to protect SR1 or also along the shorelines to protect the region and SR1? Maybe that's be positioned just along SR1.
Okay, so if I understand the question properly, so again, we're obviously very familiar with that area. So, you know, the infrastructure is what we're looking at. But again, through engagement with DENREC, who have been a partner in this project, we would engage with them because, you know, the seashore parks along there are their responsibility. So they've actually provided a little bit of input to get us to this point. And as this project is continued to be developed, we will work closely with them to integrate any potential projects that they would have along there that would, you know, be kind of a dual purpose. It would help them, but it would also help the infrastructure. Again, maybe it's some green infrastructure, some living shorelines, things like that we could potentially develop along that project area. That's what our plan is working with DENREC. Were there any other questions in the chat? Looked like you might have lost Danielle. So if folks have any other questions, if you can go ahead and drop them in the chat, or I'm sorry, in the Q&A part.
Jim, there's some additional questions on here. What about the Bayside? Your maps make it look like the studies of the wave heights, et cetera, are only considering the ocean side, but the source of the tidal flooding related to storm events can be greater on the Bayside. Thanks for that question. We are definitely, as earlier slide I had in there, we're definitely looking at the Bayside and Oceanside because of that. There's definitely the flooding potential from the Bayside, and we don't want to neglect that. So we are building that into the model. The model I was showing is more for the Oceanside, but we are also definitely building into the Bayside. And as Kira mentioned, we're also going to look at, different mitigation alternatives for both the Oceanside and the Bayside in that area.
I think I see the next question, Joe, is will DelDOT look to partners to assist with implementing the suggested mitigation activities, perhaps a criteria to consider in partnership potential? So yes, absolutely. The department, as we move forward with this project, we certainly want stakeholder engagement, stakeholder involvements. That's why we're having this discussion. Again, as Marge referenced, we'll be having more. So if you have, if you're an interested stakeholder, please feel free to reach out to us. We know there's any number of groups along there that are as passionate about it as we are. So we'd love to partner with them as we move forward. So we absolutely want the public involvement when we come to mitigation strategies.
And then, Jim, there was another question about the 10-year and the 100-year storm, about them increasing in strength. And that's one of the things we're looking at that's one of the reasons we're looking at sea level rise for that 100-year storm event in the future, and also looking at the different tracks in the model. So we are anticipating looking at some potential larger storm events in the future out years. And that's why we're using the 27.5 out year. We want to make sure whatever we put in here is mitigation alternatives for the long future, just not now. So that's where we say, there's some short-term solutions we can do, and then the longer-term mitigation alternatives that'll be farther out that we can be recommending.
Yeah, and if I could just add a little bit to that, Joe, from the department standpoints, when we're building infrastructure, we look at life cycle costs. Building things are very expensive, obviously, so we want to make sure they can last as long as they possibly can. So like Joe mentioned, that's why we're looking at these projects, all the projects we do over the long term. So, you might be wondering, why are we looking that far out? Because we want that infrastructure to last that long. The Indian River Bridge, for example, it had a 100-year design life. That's so that, it will be as robust as possible and, withstand the storm events of not only today, but of the future. So that's why we kind of do that long-term modeling.
And then there was a question about funding for the project. Jim, did you want me to answer that?
So, well, I can start, and if I miss something, you can, so funding at this point, again, to this point, we received the FEMA grant to do this work. We have every intention of continuing to go after FEMA grants. So a project like this is kind of ideal for those type of grants. It has a lot of benefits associated with it. There's obviously a need and a concern along there. So there's a lot of federal money that's available through grant applications. And, we work very closely with AECOM, with Joe and Marge and their team to help with that. So we would envision that we would go after future grants. Joe, we've already kind of talked about that and kind of teeing that up.
Yep, nope, that's what I was going to say. We're, DelDOT, from their expression, is definitely looking for the, different grants out there. And there are tons of grant opportunities out there for states, DOTs to go after, and other agencies. So that's definitely an area to target to get the money for the projects to fund them. There's a question here. Why are living shorelines projects considered to be secondary compared to hard surface mitigation?
Sure, that's a great question. So living shorelines are grouped in the secondary protection measure, since they aren't the core of the structural barrier that will protect against some of the larger storms that we're looking at. So an example of a conjunction that we are looking at would be, say, maybe raising the road with a living shoreline on one side, and the raised road that will be provide the structural integrity for as rising waters and waves It will protect against those, and then the living shoreline will help prevent erosion and work in conjunction with that to provide a comprehensive flood system.
Oh, and then there was a question. Sorry, I misspoke, and there was a typo in the presentation. There was, where did the 6 miles distance come from? It's 16 miles. That was a mistake. So it is 16 miles from Dewey to Bethany Beach. And then there is another question about South Bethany Canal System, if that's going to be evaluated. The canals will be looking at the whole side and the impacts from the bay and the water coming up those areas. So that will look into the model, can give you a more detailed answer on that. There was just a question on clarification on what year I stated for the out year design year. It's 2075 is the year that we're looking for the out year, with a 2.63 feet of sea level rise for that scenario.
All right. We have a question regarding joint funding. Will you need joint funding on projects from the local towns?
At this time, we don't envision having to tap into that resource. Again, we're looking to use grant opportunities that are available. And if we're successful on those, like we were for this one, there would not be a requirement of the town. So we would like to sit down with the towns and talk to them about what their needs are, and kind of share ideas and thoughts with them. But we would envision that we would go after federal grants for any future work. So we've done we're in the planning stage now. If we get to design and if we ultimately get to construction, that we would go after the grant opportunities.
Okay. Another coordination question. Have you looked into coordination with the Association of Coastal Towns, since all the towns on your path are members?
So I have to admit, I'm not necessarily familiar with that organization, but I will tell you that DelDOT and DenRec are involved in RASCL, the Resilient and Sustainable Community League. And I'm sure many of their partners may actually be on this call, because this announcement got sent out to them. So we would engage with them, but we're happy to engage, with that organization as well. In Delaware, there's a lot of time where kind of groups overlap, and you kind of see the same people wearing different hats at different organizations. So however we need to reach out to those particular stakeholders, we're happy to do it in any way possible.
Okay. Who's ultimately responsible for Bayside neighborhood roads and flooding? Is that the town government or DelDOT?
So it would probably depend on whose maintenance responsibility it is of the roadway. Along this corridor, like Route 1 obviously is state maintained, but some of the roads in the towns along there, some may be DelDOT maintained, some may be maintained by the towns. So we would just have, if there's a specific road, we'd have to look it up and verify whether it's state maintained or it's maintained by the town.
Is the focus of the study preparing for big storms or sunny day flooding events?
Yes. Unfortunately, the challenge we have in Delaware is we have both. So this study, again, like Joe was mentioning, is more for the higher impact, because again, for the short term, knock on wood, I think we've kind of taken care of some of the sunny day events that we would have along that corridor with the projects we've already done. This is more for the more, the stronger, more powerful storms that we may see in the future. But the sunny day flooding, we obviously have that concern on a lot of roadways around the state. And that's kind of why our division was created, was to look at that. So Stephanie and I, in cooperation with AECOM, are kind of looking at that across the state right now as well.
Yeah, and also when we're looking at handling the much larger storms, that thereby also handle the sunny day event. So if we can, stop that major storm event from overtopping the road, we'll also have the same benefit for those sunny day type of overtoppings.
Okay, this is a schedule question. Will the study work on segments sequentially? And when is it planned to study segment 6, Fenwick Island?
So as Joe mentioned, and we showed in the slide, we have broken it up into segments, and we have to look at that kind of from a prioritization as far as exposure. That's part of the discussions we want to have with communities, and kind of, having a roadshow to come out to the communities themselves. But we also are going to look at, looking at that modeling of, from the infrastructure standpoint, which segments are the most exposed based on the modeling that has been done. So I can't answer that right now, but as we move forward, that's a future conversation, and we'll be able to share that information as we move forward. Joe, I don't know if there's anything further you wanted to add to that.
Yeah, just making sure I understand, the question. Maybe I misunderstood it, but from a study standpoint, we are studying all 6 segments at once. So all 6 segments are under this study. We're not going to break up the study and look at them one by one. It's just going, in order. It would be the future projects that you would look at, breaking out the different segments by vulnerability. But the study as a whole is looking at all 6 segments right now.
Okay.
Thank you, Joe. I was jumping ahead.
Our next question is a future storm creating a new inlet in the 6 Mile project area. Is that something that's being considered? Similar to the one south of Ocean City. So there's concern over a future storm creating a new inlet, and whether or not that's being considered in the study.
I don't know if the
I would have to follow up on that, Jim. We'll have to look at that. We can answer that later.
Yeah, it's good question. Fortunately, we can't answer, but we will get you. We'll have to find out what the modeling can potentially do.
Okay. Will the Indian River Bridge be able to extend a larger reach northward to allow the occasional opening of the old inlet? I don't know if that's.
Could the bridge, I'm sorry, could you repeat the question?
Will the Indian River Bridge be able to extend a larger reach northward to allow the occasional opening of the old inlet?
If I understand the question properly, I don't believe so. I mean, the existing Indian River Inlet Bridge is its footprint is set, if you will. The approaches are out of the water for the reason of, the previous bridges that were along there, and the concern with the scour along there because of the current through there. And it was intentionally, and Joe, you were involved, I believe, in that, is where the foundations are currently with the Indian River Inlet Bridge. That was in anticipation of potential widening by the Corps of Engineers, was it not?
I'll have to verify that, Jim, but I think you're right.
I think it was. That's why it's kind of even set back a little bit. It's not right along the footprint of the existing channel through there. And I thought it was for future widening if the Corps of Engineers was in fact going to do that. But good question. We'll have to double check on that and get back to you.
Okay. Are there future plans to perform similar study work focusing on the residential areas and the transportation and flooding issues in those locations?
So this is just one kind of corridor analysis that DelDOT is undertaking. We are looking at others across the state as well. And we're looking at areas that are critical corridors that kind of have a vital need for the state. And that could be for safety, for commerce, movement of goods, personnel safety. So we're looking at a number of locations across the state. So if there's specific areas of concern, feel free to reach out to myself, and happy to have that conversation.
Okay. Were earthquakes, or are earthquakes and tsunamis being considered as part of this study?
Not as part of the study, no.
Another question about the study. Utility resiliency impacts, are those being considered?
So when we're doing the benefit cost analysis, we're going to be looking at the different mitigation alternatives and look at what type of benefits they have. So if there's secondary benefits such as utilities, that could be taken in consideration. And then also we'd be looking at any potential cost impacts of those being impacted. So not directly, but indirectly, it would be included to a certain level.
Will the changes that we're studying, will your changes you make possibly affect zoning in the area?
I'm going to say no, because we would either do it within the existing right-of-way we have, or if, depending on where we end up as far as a mitigation strategy, if any type of right-of-way acquisition would be required, we would just go through our normal process. So there's no intent from this planning study to do anything with zoning or land use.
Okay. The next question is there something local residents can do to add support to FEMA or other funding requests?
Comment forms are a great way. As part of the FEMA grant application, we do need to show support from the public and a public outreach. So, we have that comment form out there. So, feel free to go in there and show your support there, and then that can be used in our documentation when we do a FEMA grant.
Right, and please attend the next virtual meeting as well.
Yes.
Okay. There's a question about coordinating with local efforts, and I believe you guys have touched upon that previously. I don't know if there's anything you want to add.
I guess the only thing I'd say is from a department, from DelDOT standpoint, we're doing this study, and I know our planning division, they look at various projects along this corridor as well. So, we'll coordinate internally with DelDOT. But again, I know, and we've had some conversations with the towns along there. We want to hear about some projects that they may be doing along there, and see if they're going to either be doing those projects before we potentially are coming in with ours, or after, or maybe some type of integration of some of those. So that's why, again, kind of what Joe just said is the more we hear from the community and the leadership along these from the towns and the cities along here, we'd love to hear from you so that we can coordinate, because the last thing we obviously want to do is backtrack or have to rip something up that somebody else had just done. That just doesn't good. So we want to have open communication. That's why we're having this discussion and want to have future discussions with the leaders.
Okay, we have a question about the AECOM team and where they are actually located.
All right. So I'll answer that one, Jim. So I'm actually out of the Newark, Delaware office. And then the person who's doing the sediment transport model analysis was actually out of the Dewey Beach area. So we have a local presence, but then we also have a national presence. So we're local and then global too, to pull in our resources from around the world and around the country.
Okay, great. Given the world situation today, will road survival against nuclear attacks, including EMP, be considered in the design phase of the project?
I do not believe that is part of our study.
Okay. The last question that we have right now, this is more concerning going to that webpage and not seeing the comment form. So I'm verifying, but I believe that the link is on our webpage. The clickable link with the comment form.
Yep. So the link is out there for the comment form. Based on the question, it looks like it wanted to have a form to keep posted on the updates. We're currently working on creating some of the projects and studies that DelDOT has. You can register on Blackboard to get updates. And so it would essentially send you a text message or an email to let you know when there are additional updates, and we can work on that. But in the meantime, we're just asking for folks to check out the webpage periodically with for any additional information. And then we'll also be continuing to put out updates through our community relations and other networks to be able to get the word out on what's going on in the project.
And also on the comment form, if you put your email address in there, we can also add you to our distribution list too, for Rimline to send out notifications and updates too along those lines.
Okay. I think that is all we have for now.
Okay. Well, with that, if there aren't any other questions, we again want to thank you for your time. We hope that this session was informative for you, and hopefully we provided information. Again, after you drop from this, if you have any questions, comments, thoughts, concerns, again, go to the website, go ahead and send us an email. And we look forward to future engagement with everybody as we move forward. Again, as Joe mentioned, or Marge mentioned, late this year, early next year is probably when we'll be ready to kind of come out with the next round of information. So we look forward to the continued engagement, and we thank you so much for your time this evening. Hello, everyone. Welcome to this evening. Welcome to our SR1 Coastal Resiliency Study. My name is Jim Pappas. I'm the Director of Transportation Resiliency and Sustainability for the Delaware Department of Transportation. And on behalf of the team, I want to thank you for spending a little bit of your time tonight for us to give you an update on a planning study that we are conducting along the SR1 coastal corridor. We want to start this evening's session with a presentation from DelDOT's Cabinet Secretary, Nicole Majeski.
Hi, everyone. I'm Nicole Majeski, Secretary of the Delaware Department of Transportation. It's my pleasure to welcome you to our virtual public meeting for the SR1 Coastal Corridor Resiliency Study. One of our goals at DelDOT is to examine the impacts climate change and sea level rise are having on our transportation infrastructure and incorporate resilient and sustainable mitigation measures in the planning, design, construction, and maintenance of our projects. As the lowest lying state, creating resilient infrastructure in the face of roadway flooding is a challenge. We have been and continue to be challenged by frequently flooded roadways, even on sunny days. The SR1 corridor between Dewey Beach and the Maryland state line is particularly vulnerable, with effects coming from both the ocean as well as the bay. This planning study will allow the department to develop short and long-term solutions to help protect this important roadway for both the safety of the traveling public and the economic stability of the state. I look forward to your participation tonight and want to thank you for your time and engagement in our meeting. I also want to thank our staff that has been working on this very important initiative. Thank you all very much.
Great. Thank you, Secretary Majeski. So what we wanted to start this evening was to introduce you to the team that you're going to hear from various members tonight. And as we move forward, you'll be hearing from in the future. So again, my name is Jim Pappas. I'm the Director of Transportation Resiliency and Sustainability at the Delaware Department of Transportation. Our Assistant Director, Stephanie Johnson, is also on this call as a member of the team. And DelDOT is thrilled to be engaged with AECOM and REMLine on this project. So from AECOM, we have on the call, Joe Hofste is the project manager. We also have Kira Murphy, who is the marine structural engineer, and you'll be hearing from both of them throughout the presentation. And also Marge Quinn, who is the planning manager, will also be providing some input on how the public can stay engaged as we move forward. We also want to thank the partnership of Danielle Lloyd from Redline, who has helped us get us to this point, and we are just so happy to be involved in this team. There's a lot of passion about this project, and we're really excited to be involved. So we thank you again for your time this evening. So this evening, what we're going to go through are the following items. So what are the expectations of the workshop and the study? So, why are we having this, and what's the need for this? Again, I think those who may be familiar with the area, you understand the concerns that we have there, but we want to kind of go into a little bit more detail about that so you understand, why we've initiated this. Joe will go over the study's purpose and need. We'll talk about the study area. Again, this is going to be from Dewey Beach all the way down to Fenwick Island, so pretty long stretch along there. Joe will briefly talk about some of the modeling that has been done, and we understand there's more modeling that will need to be done, and we understand that, but we just kind of want to introduce you to the concept of the modeling that AECOM has done for us. And then Kira is going to talk about some of the mitigation measures that potentially could be used. Again, we want to stress, this is just a planning study to this point. There's no decisions that have been made. We just want to talk to you about what we've kind of done and, get engagement from the communities and hear what your thoughts and what your ideas are. And then we'll talk about the evaluation criteria. Here we'll go over those as well. And then finally, we're going to kind of talk about the path forward. What are the next steps for this team? And what are the next steps for you as the community to stay involved and engaged? And Marge will go over that. And then at the end, we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have. Marge is going to go over this, but there's the ability for you to ask us questions here. And also, moving forward, if you have any questions, we're going to point you to our website where you can reach out to us. So again, we thank you for your time this evening. We hope that you find this informative, and we'll be happy to answer any questions that you may have as we go through this presentation. So now I want to turn it over to our partner, AECOM Consulting Firm, is who DelDOT has engaged with for this project. And again, Joe Hofste is the project manager, so I'm going to turn it over to Joe. Oh, Joe, you're on mute.
Sorry about that. I'm going to hand this over to Marge Quinn to briefly go over the workshop expectations.
Sure, thank you, Joe. So what are our expectations for tonight? Well, this is our first public workshop, and we want to let everybody know that there will be more to follow. And so why are we here tonight? What are our objectives? Well, it's to kick off the study with the public and begin that public engagement process. Start the important conversations on community needs, and for the team here to understand what those needs are. In terms of how to provide comments or ask questions, for tonight, there's a question and answer function in your toolbar. You can use that anytime during the presentation or during the question and answer period to either offer a comment or to ask a question. Anytime from tonight on, you can also fill out an online comment form that's on the study's website. And also any other time, you can also send an email to dotpublic@delaware.gov. You can send in a comment or ask a question. The questions that are going to be asked tonight, we will have a question and answer document on the study's website, so you'll be able to review that later as well. So with that, Joe, I think I'm turning it back to you for study expectations.
Yes, thanks, Marge. So now I want to go through the study expectations for the SR1 Corridor Coastal Resiliency Study. So up here on the screen, I have the timeline. So the initiation of the study began back in early 2021, when DelDOT submitted to Fema advanced study grant application for the resiliency study of SR1. DelDOT was awarded the grant from Fema in early 2021. And the funding became available in the fall of 2021, where at that point, DelDOT and AECOM and DNREC began the resiliency study of SR1, pulling a lot of background information, studying the area, and beginning some of those models that we will be talking about and that Jim alluded to. Right now in the timeline, we're in 2022 at the public workshop number 1. So as Marge mentioned, Jim mentioned, this is where we want to begin to get the public involved in the study and begin to get that input and vital information from the public and get feedback from the public. Following this workshop, AECOM is going to develop the draft technical report, which is going to be submitted to DelDOT later this year for their review. Upon DelDOT's review and approval, we're going to come back out for a public workshop in early 2023 to go over those findings and further present the information that we've shown tonight. Based off the public workshop number 2, we're going to update and finalize that technical report and resubmit that. By the end of 2024, DelDOT's going to be looking to submit grant applications for future breakout projects or future studies. As you can see on the timeline, we have an arrow going beyond 2024. This is just the beginning. There will be breakout projects that will be identified from this study, with the study being wrapped up in late 2024. This is a high-level planning study. That's one of the main things I want everyone to take away from this. This is not a design project. This is a planning study to help identify the different mitigation alternatives and to prioritize the different locations. So future projects will be identified as part of this project. So now I want to discuss a little bit about the purpose and need. So what's the purpose of the study? The purpose of the study is to establish existing and future storm conditions, both the Bayside and the ocean side. Identify a range of potential mitigation alternatives that Kira is going to be talking about. And those are going to be separated into segments and also Bayside and ocean side. We want to look at them separately. Then we're looking, which also Kira will be discussing, is establishing criteria to evaluate the potential mitigation alternatives. So we want to come up with a way to rank the different alternatives and judge how well they address the existing and future conditions of the area. And we want to evaluate those conceptual mitigations off those criteria. And most importantly, we want to work with the public and stakeholders to determine the preferred alternatives and get input on those. So why is this study needed? SR1 is the primary evacuation route for both Bethany Beach, South Bethany Beach, Fenwick Island, and Ocean City, Maryland in case of an emergency. both natural, for natural from the hurricanes, nor'easters, or any large storm event that's coming up the way. It's critical to get the people in and out of the area. One of the major concerns is a closure of SR1 between Indian River Bridge and Dewey Beach results in an 18-mile detour of that area, which can equate to over an hour or more of wait time, especially on the time of the year or how much traffic there is in the area at that time. This study's also goal is to improve the overall resiliency of SR1 and to reduce maintenance costs by increasing resiliency of SR1. That means the less money that the state of Delaware and DelDOT will have to spend to maintain the roadway by reducing the flooding that occurs on it. Also to ensure a direct route of travel is available. This also supports the 2016 DEMA Multi-Jurisdictional All Hazard Mitigation Plan and the 2018 State of Delaware All Hazard Mitigation Plan. Both those plans identify coastal flooding as the #1 natural hazard that's going to affect the state of Delaware. And they called for the DelDOT and the state to look at ways to mitigate those hazards. So this study helps accomplish that. SR1 is also vital to the economic well-being of this area and also as a state as a whole. We want to make sure people are able to access the restaurants, the resort areas, the businesses that line the SR1 corridor. SR1 provides that direct link for those looking to visit the Delaware beaches and provides year-round travelers and residents ease of access to the coastal communities. So I want to go into the study area. So the study area is 16 miles of State Route 1 coastal highway. Begins at Dewey Beach in our northern limits and extends down to the southern limits of the Maryland state line. The northern limits is in Dewey Beach is, to be precise, is the New Orleans Street, which is shown in the breakout map in the upper right corner. To give you a good landmarks, New Orleans Street is just south of the Starboard. The study area is 16 miles, so we want to make sure we break it out into several segments, since not one segment is the same. So we want to treat them differently, and we're modeling these areas even into greater segments. But we're looking at breaking this out into 6 proposed segments to look at different mitigation potential alternatives to mitigate the area. The 6 segments were broken out based on surrounding terrain conditions. So on the left-hand side of the map, we have Dewey Beach, which will be our northern limits, and going right, we'll be heading south down to Fenwick Island. So I want to go in a little greater detail on the different segments. So segment 1 is the Dewey Beach area, which on the east is residential and on the west is also residential with the ocean on the eastern side. As we move out of the Dewey Beach area and head just south of Indian River Inlet Bridge, we get in a much more beach vegetation area where the beach is on our eastern side and then vegetation more on the western side and also with our bay on that side too. And there are some homes and businesses in this area, but primarily beach and vegetation. As we move further south in segment 3, which is just south of the Indian River Inlet Bridge to North Bethany Beach, we're looking at more residential on the eastern side, but on that western Bayside, we're still looking at more vegetation with a few businesses here or there. As we move into the next, continue south into segment number 4, the Bethany Beach area, we're looking at residential on the eastern side and residential also on the western side, which a much larger area and not so much effects of the bay. So we move into segment 5, we're looking at the beach vegetation area. It's more as similar to the areas that we have up near the Indian River Inlet Bridge, where we have the beach on the east and vegetation on the west with a few homes and businesses located in that area. As we move into segment 6, we enter the Fenwick Island area, which is residential on both the east and the western side, with more canals also on the western side. So those are the 6 segments that we're going to be going over further in the study. So this is a map of this is a graph showing the elevations of the roadway of Route 1. So on the left-hand side, we're looking at the northern limits, and the right-hand side, we're looking at the southern limits. So as we move north to south, left to right, we start in the Dewey Beach area, which is segment 1, which starts at about 12-foot elevation. By the time you're leaving Dewey Beach, you're getting down to that 4-foot elevation area. Segment 2, which is from the Dewey Beach to just south of the Indian River Inlet Bridge, we're looking at elevations from 6 to less than 2 feet of elevation. Segment 3, when we get south of the Indian River Bridge going into North Bethany, we're looking at elevations anywhere from just over 2 feet to a little around the 8-foot mark. As we move into Bethany Beach, we're looking at one of our higher elevated segments, which is not that high. We're looking at anywhere from 8 feet to about 4 feet in elevation above sea level. Our segment 5, which is south of Bethany into the Fenwick area, we're looking at elevations from 4 to 2 feet. And then as we enter the Fenwick area, we're in elevations from 4 to just under 6 feet. As you can see from this, the Route 1 sits very low along the coastal line and is definitely prone to easy overtopping and flooding as a result of those low-lying elevations. Next, I want to get into the coastal model that we've started and continue to move forward with. So as part of the model, we're going to look at existing and future conditions. We want to look at what storm events we have now, but we also want to look at the future with the potential for sea level rise and also larger, greater storm events and increased hurricane frequencies and storm events. So we want to take that into account. We want to make sure we future-proof these alternatives as much as we can. We're going to be looking at a regional and a local model, and I'm going to get into greater detail on the regional and the local model. We're also going to do a sediment transport model. So the sediment transport model is important. It looks at the erosion that will happen along the coastline as a result of these storm events and the impacts those will have on future flooding events. It also looks at the dunes that we have along the coastal line and determines what storm event they can withstand, if they're going to be breached and washed away, if they're actually going to provide mitigation to the storm event. It's also critical to look at the sediment transport model for future potential alternatives to make sure what we're putting out there can withstand the storms. We're also going to analyze both the Bayside and Oceanside. We're aware that the Bayside and Oceanside both contribute to the overtopping of the roadway, with the Bayside more on our sunny day events. So we want to make sure we take into account both the Bayside and the Oceanside flooding. So moving into our coastal regional model, the regional model is really needed to feed our local model. And on the right-hand side of the screen, I show an arrow pointed to the project site. The regional model, it's a very large model. It's going all the way down the Caribbeans, all the way up Canada. Input for this is hurricane best track data, synthetic to generate cyclones, and tidal information, and other spatial attributes. As I mentioned before, the outputs that we're looking to get here is the water level and wave information that's going to feed into our local model. So our local model focuses more on the Delaware coastline and a little bit north and south of that area. The input, and we're looking to simulate wave heights at the study area site under different scenarios. The inputs that we're looking at come from the output from the regional model, water levels from Fema flood insurance study, extreme wave conditions based on US wave information stations from NOAA, and then extreme wind conditions based on local airport wind stations. We're also going to be incorporating the sea level rise into the scenarios. The outputs that we're looking to get from this is local wave condition for different scenarios and wave information for sediment transport model simulations. I'm going to now turn it over to Kira to go through the examples of primary flood mitigation protections that we'll be looking to potentially implement.
Great, thank you, Joe. So to protect SR1, the design team is evaluating the following primary flood mitigation measures. Starting from the top left of the screen, we have the exposed flood wall, which is a vertical barrier built to retain floodwaters. It's typically made out of concrete and can be clad with different materials for visual enhancement. Next, to the right, we have the buried flood wall or structural dune, which is typically made from either concrete or steel sheet piles as pictured. and is then covered with soil or sand to form a berm or a dune. Next, we have short-term deployables, which are temporary solutions to provide flood protection. There are two types of short-term deployables. The first includes deployable measures that are stored off-site and then brought to site prior to a storm. Some examples of these include water-filled bladder barriers or L-shaped barriers. The second type of temporary deployables are brought on site and then remain there on a day-to-day basis. Some examples of these are sandbags or geotextile filled bags. On the bottom left, we have permanent deployables, which are flood barriers that provide longer-term flood protection and have a permanent foundation. They are designed to maintain pedestrian and vehicular access during dry conditions and are only deployed before storm events. Examples of these include flip-up gates, swing gates, and slider gates. And then to the right, we have raised and rerouted roadways, which can be used to preserve evacuation routes. We are also considering secondary flood mitigation measures, which can provide additional benefits and may be used in conjunction with the primary measures to create a comprehensive flood protection system. On the left, we have living shorelines, which are a bioengineered natural infrastructure solution that can assist in shore stabilization and also protect against erosion. They can also provide wildlife and ecological benefits. On the right, we have revetments, which are sloping structures made out of stone that are very prevalent along coastlines, and they can provide slope stabilization, erosion protection, and energy absorption. Next slide, please. Once we identify potential mitigation measures for the different segments that Joe described earlier in the presentation, we will then evaluate them based on the following evaluation criteria. Starting with the level of flood protection, which is essentially what level can each mitigation measure protect up to. Next, we'll look at the construction costs of how expensive will each option be to build, as well as the operation and maintenance costs. So once the structure is built, how much will it cost to maintain over its life cycle? We'll also consider the physical constraints, which include time, as well as the existing conditions, including right-of-way and any existing commercial and real estate infrastructure in the area. We'll look at the benefit cost ratio, which compares the future risk reduction benefits to the costs, the environmental effects, so the benefits and impacts to the natural environment, including carbon reduction and wildlife habitats, the community effects, the benefits and impacts to the built environment, including traffic volumes and travel times, and last but not least, aesthetics and visual effects, the visual impacts the proposed options may have for the community and the general public. I'm going to turn it back to Joe to go over the next steps.
Thanks, Kira. So the next steps, where are we heading after this? So we're going to model the following storm events for each of the 6 segments that we've talked about. We're going to look at a 10-year storm event for existing and future conditions. And we're also going to look at the 100-year storm event for existing and future conditions. We're going to perform the erosion analysis that I spoke about. We're going to apply the evaluation criteria to the various mitigation alternatives. We're going to then hold the second public workshop in early 2023. We're going to prepare a report of the findings, and we're going to prioritize the segments and mitigation alternatives. We're also going to be looking to submit grants and identify and submit grant applications to advance the study recommendations into future design projects. I'm going to now hand it over to Marge to go over how to stay involved.
Thanks, Joe. So we have 3 primary mechanisms for you to stay involved post tonight. You can visit the study's website, and we provide the address here. The study's website will have the slides that have been used at the 2 presentations tonight, as well as the recording, so you don't necessarily have to look at the slides. And then we will also have a question and answer document for the questions that have been posed for tonight, so you can review that. You can also complete a online comment form. We ask questions about how you use SR1, what segments you travel in. We'd like to get your feedback on the mitigation alternatives that Kira presented. Also, what your thinking is in terms of the ranking for the evaluation criteria. We also offer areas where you can provide any other comment or concern that you may have. If you include your email address, then you'll be part of our mailing list and will get advance notice of the meetings. You can also attend our next virtual public meeting. That'll be advertised both on the study's website as well as through DelDOT's social media and then via email and traditional mailers. So with that, those are the three methods that we'd like to ask you to stay involved. Jim, I think we're going to go into questions and answers after you close.
Yes, we are. Thank you, Marge. So now it's time to hear from you. So we gave a kind of a high level, update on what we've done, where we're going, and how we're going to get there. Now we're happy to answer any questions that you may have on anything that we've gone over this evening. So if you do have any questions, please go ahead and just put it in the Q&A, and we're going to go ahead and start the questions and answers.
All right, and apologies because I'm not exactly sure how this is pronounced, but we have a question. This is regarding Joe's portion of the presentation, a measurement that was mentioned. Is that measurement, I don't know if it's NAVD or NAVD, 88 is the question.
So it's NAV 88, and we're looking at for the elevation of how it's tied into the elevation system and what system is. So it's tied it down into NAV 88. The elevations that we're showing is based off of LiDAR information that we were able to obtain and elevations that were shown on old historical plans. So the elevations we're showing is, it's not ground surveyed elevations, it's more from a LiDAR elevation, but it's tied down to the NAV 88.
Okay, next question. What sea level rise projections are you using in your modeling?
So for the sea level rise projections, we're looking out at the out year of 2075 for the out year that we're looking at with a sea level rise of 2.63 feet. That's what we're going to be looking at for the future out condition.
Okay.
And I believe those are DENRECs.
Yes. Yep, March, thank you very much. So those are from the studies that's been done for sea level rise and DENREC has adopted those as different scenarios, and that's the one scenario that we're going with.
Okay, as of right now, those are all of our live questions. So while we're waiting for more live questions to go, never mind. Okay, all right, so here's a question. I'm 1 mile inland in segment 4. How far inland is of interest? Is your feedback? How far inland? Yes, the question is, how far inland are we looking for feedback?
I would say anywhere along that corridor, if you use SR1 in kind of any way, shape, or form, or in any frequency, we're happy to hear your feedback. So we did kind of a broad announcement of this meeting because we wanted to hear from a lot of folks along there. SR1, as Joe mentioned in his presentation, is kind of the spine of everything down in that area. So if you use it, when it goes down, it becomes quite an issue for the commuters. And again, from a public safety standpoint, that's of great concern for DelDOT. So kind of anybody who uses that corridor, we'd be happy to get your input.
And Jim, our model does extend far to the west too. It reaches very far out to the west for the future flooding. As this whole area is very low lying, so the model definitely takes that into account, looks farther out.
Yeah, I didn't want to be too doom and gloom to say even if you're that far in, unfortunately you're going to have an impact, but you're 100% right.
Okay, have there been thoughts about bolstering east-west routes for evacuation and increasing emergency shelters?
So the second part, as far as the emergency shelters, so that's more of a DEMA, the Delaware Emergency Management. That's not really a DelDOT thing. We're obviously partners with them. but that would be more of a question for them. But as far as the east-west, yes, that is a concern. If you're familiar with the area, and if you've been around long enough, you remember Route 54, and Kira actually had it in her slide, that the lower right corner picture. The old SR54, that was an evacuation route, and unfortunately at times it was underwater. So literally the evacuation route was underwater, and obviously that's not acceptable. So the elevated structure was built out there along Route 54 to at least bolster that area. And one of the things in our new division of resiliency and sustainability, we're kind of looking across the state. Again, as Secretary Majeski referenced in her opening video, Delaware is the lowest lying state in the country. So we have not only storm event induced flooding, but we have the sunny day flooding, and again, unfortunately, some of you may encounter that on a beautiful sunny day like today, depending on the way the wind's blowing and the tide cycle, we could have roads underwater. So Stephanie and I are in engagement with AECOM, are kind of looking at some of the frequently flooded roadways and how can we address those both short-term and long-term. And so this planning study, like Joe mentioned, this is looking at the long term. This is not something that we're going to be able to implement tomorrow. To the credit of our maintenance division in Sussex County, they've done a great job of being able to keep Route 1 open during most storm events. And that's typically with a short-term fix of kind of putting a couple inches of pavement out there just to keep raising the road, to kind of keep it as dry as possible, or at least keep one lane open again from an emergency response standpoint. We know we can't keep doing that as the storm events become more intense and increase in numbers. We need to look at something, for the long term. So that's, why we initiated this study. So to the question, yes, we are looking at the east-west corridors as well. And overall, we're looking at this across the department, but we're going to prioritize, the evacuation routes when we're looking at short-term projects.
Okay. There's a question regarding downtown Bethany, specifically along Pennsylvania Avenue near the post office, that floods regularly. Is this area included in the study?
So the area would be included in our modeling effort, but the road itself wouldn't be necessarily included in the study area if that's what the question is in regards to.
And Joe, I'm assuming there's an existing flooding condition there. So we'd have to verify whether that was state maintained or if the town maintains that. But we can look into that. I'm not sure if that's state maintained or town maintained, but we can look into that.
Okay. How will mitigation measures be implemented in the areas where homes are within feet of Route 1?
Well, I guess I'll start, Joe, and Joe or Kira, if you want to jump in. I was going to reference, Kira did a great job showing potential options along the corridor. And the reason that segments were broken up the way they were, and again, Joe's slide showed that, is, there's different kind of topography, around there. And we fully understand that there's not a one size fits all for the entire corridor. There are going to probably be different mitigations in different areas. So Joe or Kira, I don't know if you want to, add to that.
Yeah, Jim, we're definitely going to be looking at, the different type of alternatives, ones that keep us, farther away from the road and not impact those along, the coastline and along the beach area. Kira, you want to further explain?
Sure, I just wanted to add that existing residential houses and commercial infrastructure all fall into that evaluation criteria of physical constraints and existing conditions. And so when we are looking at all the segments individually, we will tailor what recommended alternative there are for the different measures that exist there.
Okay. Will your planning consult other flooding planning projects with towns, Delaware State Parks, and other DNREC entities, including those offshore?
So DNREC is a partner with us on this project. When we put in for the grant that Joe mentioned in the kind of the timeline, we're in partnership with DNREC. So DNREC has been involved, and we certainly intend to continue to engage with them moving forward. As Joe mentioned there, to the east side, that's their kind of area. This planning study is looking at the infrastructure, but there's obviously ecological concerns around there as well. So engagement with DENREC is certainly, what we plan to do moving forward.
All right. Are you considering raising the level of Route 1 permanently to be above water level?
So raising Route 1 to stay ahead of the water is a continual challenge because the water just keeps coming and coming. So again, to the credit of our maintenance folks, they have done several projects along that corridor to keep it passable, even during storm events. Again, the whole reason for this study is we can't continue to do that. Short term, we will certainly do everything in our power to continue to be able to keep Route 1 open. This is more, again, looking at, as Joe mentioned in the modeling, some of these more significant severe storm events that, looking at the modeling are just going to continue to increase as we go forward. So short term, we have plans, we are able to, we think, stay in front of it. Longer term, just keep putting asphalt out there is not going to be the answer. We need to look at something, and thusly why we have engaged in this planning study.
Okay. What is the cost of property damage to Sussex County?
In the last 20 years, I believe it's been in excess of 50 million. For that impacts the Sussex County just from the coastal flooding event. So one of the main reasons why we want to try to take this study in there and look at ways to mitigate those costs and damages.
All right. And where does flooding rank as far as hazards?
Go ahead, Joe.
Go ahead, Jim.
I'd say number 1, number 2, number 3, number 4. It's a significant concern, as Joe mentioned in the slide. And I can tell you from DelDOT standpoint, when we look at all of our assets, roads, bridges, structures, across the state, the concern with climate change and sea level rise is just getting more and more of a concern. And so that's why the department created a division to solely look at this challenge we have of our assets and doing things like this planning study, other planning studies we're doing across the state, and looking at ways that we can, mitigate the changes that we're seeing and, to the extent we can ensure that our assets are continue to be able to be used by the traveling public.
And Jim was right about the 1, 2, 3, and 4. Based off the DEMA all hazard mitigation study, the number 1 was coastal flooding. Number 2 was nor'easters. Number 3 was hurricanes and tropical storms. And then number 4 was winter precipitation.
Okay. What are some things residents can do personally to protect their property from flood damage? Are there any resources?
So I will say that I know there's an organization called RASCL, which is the Resilience and Sustainable Community League, and they're an option to kind of start some engagement. They want to be involved with some communities, and DENREC has resources as well that might be able to provide some guidance in that respect.
Yeah, Jim, and I wanted to add, I know FEMA, DEMA through FEMA also offers some grant opportunities for homeowners as well.
Okay. And do you know when the last major evacuation occurred and how many were evacuated?
Ooh, I'm assuming they're referencing down in the beach area. I don't know that off the top of my head, either the date or the numbers. We can get that information, but I apologize. I don't know that off the top of my head.
Where will the money come from to fund these projects?
Again, as Joe mentioned in his presentation, so the work that's being done right now was through a FEMA grant, and we have we've already started the conversation amongst the team to go after the next phase of FEMA funding. So again, we're doing the planning study now. The next step after the planning would be design and then ultimately for construction. So our vision is that we would continue to go after FEMA grant opportunities, and we think we have a really good shot to continue to get funding. This is the criticality of this location, the need for it along there, the community, this is something I think that the community can certainly get behind. So with those factors, we think we have a lot of momentum to be able to continue to go after the FEMA grants. Joe, I don't know if you want to add anything more. So AECOM assisted us in getting this grant, and again, we plan to engage with them moving forward with the grant writing as well.
Jim, I think you covered it very well. There's a lot of money out there right now for these type of mitigation and these type of studies and projects. So, definitely looking out there for the different, grant opportunities, and try to get as many grant funding opportunities as we can.
Okay, these two kind of go together. So what other areas in Delaware are being looked at for resiliency? And also, what coastal resiliency has DelDOT done or has planned?
Okay, so other planning studies that the department has either initiated or is getting ready to is the Route 9 corridor, kind of from Newcastle towards the Kent County line. SR 299 to the east of Odessa is another one that we've already started with. AECOM is actually doing that work as well. So those are kind of active planning studies that we're doing. The other thing that we've done in cooperation with our maintenance districts is Stephanie and I have given them kind of a map of the state, and we've asked for them to provide us what we're calling our frequently flooded roadways. So these are the roadways that our maintenance folks who are out there day in and day out can map for us. So they have provided that information. Stephanie is working on creating maps of those, and then we're going to start prioritizing those locations because, as Joe just mentioned, there's funding available for this type of work moving forward. So we want to capture that money, but we want to prioritize those locations. So that's kind of what we are doing moving forward. So those are the planning studies. Probably one of our first locations, if you're familiar with South Bowers, which is in Kent County, kind of just north of Milford. That's a location that floods quite often and kind of cuts off that community. So we have been engaged with the community for a little over a year. And again, with the assistance of AECOM, we've designed a project, and we're planning to move forward with a short-term, asphalt overlay to raise the road so that the community has access. Because again, the challenge there, and we have this with several communities along the coast, is there's only one way in and one way out. So when that road is shut off because of a foot of water or 2 feet of water, the community is basically cut off. And again, emergency response, that's a big concern for us. So we're in the process right now of looking across the state and prioritizing it, and then matching it with the funding opportunities that are available.
Okay. Is DelDOT looking at evacuation routes in addition to Route 1 that are also likely to be impacted?
Yeah, good question. Again, kind of goes back to what I just said. So when we're looking at this, the mapping of these frequently flooded roadways that we have across the state, one of the criteria that we're going to look at in the prioritization is it an evacuation route? Are there emergency responders, a fire company, police officers, a DelDOT maintenance yard, for example, that could be used in the case of an evacuation need? So we're going to prioritize those locations, and again, look at both short-term and long-term mitigation steps that we can take. Again, the nice thing is in the short term, we can quickly and relatively easily go out and put a couple inches of pavement to raise the roads in the short term. We would have to then look at what the long-term solution would be. But that's literally what Stephanie and I, with the assistance of AECOM, are kind of working on right now.
Okay, great. I apologize if we touched on this, but there's a question about engaging with local governments. Do we plan to engage with local governments, the incorporated towns, to help identify the recommended mitigations? If so, when will that occur?
Okay, so yes, absolutely. We want to have engagement. We've talked about kind of having a road show. So tonight's discussions and the discussions that we're going to have in the future, virtually, are going to kind of talk about the entire corridor. And we know that, there are community members that are, they want to know about what's going on in the whole 16 miles, but they're also mostly concerned about, their corner of the world. And we completely understand that. So we want to reach out to the towns along this corridor we're happy to come at a public meeting, a town council meeting, anything like that. Feel free, reach out to us. We'll get something on your schedule when you have availability for us. We'd be happy to come down and talk to the communities kind of in a smaller setting to hear their concerns, their needs. We want to take that, again, Marge mentioned this is, the whole idea of this conversation is to collect information from the community so that can kind of help us guide us in our decision making. And again, you will be engaged as we continue on in this process.
Okay, and this is just a question about a deadline for comments. Is there a deadline for receiving comments for the study?
Not until we're ready to put shovels in the ground, I'd say.
Great. All right, that looks like all of our questions so far.
Okay. Well, I guess so just in case there are any other questions, again, feel free to go ahead and drop those in the Q&A. But again, we appreciate everybody's time tonight. We want to get engagement with the communities along there. That came very clearly in the session we had earlier at 5 o'clock. The communities are definitely interested in this, and again, we want to hear from you. Again, as Joe mentioned, we're very early on in the planning stages. Even though Kara referenced some of the potential options we can do, that was mostly for illustrative purposes to kind of get community members to kind of understand the terms that we're going to use as we go forward with this. But there's been no decisions, there's no plans that have been drawn up or anything like that. We're very early on, so we understand the critical nature of this. This team understands the critical nature of it. We're committed to do whatever we can to address this again, both in the short term and the long term. So we're ready to engage with the communities.
Hey, Jim, we received a couple more questions. Are you coordinating with the Center for Inland Bays?
We work with the Center for Inland Bays, yes. About a month or so ago, ironically, we were on a call with them, and they were talking about some work that's being potentially being done in Dewey Beach. And we kind of spoke up and said, that's going to be part of our corridor study. And so we did have an offline conversation with them and also the town. And so, yes, we're familiar with the Center for Inland Bays. They know about this. Michelle was actually on the session earlier. I think I saw her name. So we have been engaged, and we want to continue to be engaged with them and other organizations that are along there. Again, we mentioned DENREC, obviously they're a partner of ours. But if you're involved in some type of other organization that maybe we don't know about or we haven't worked with in the past, we want to work together on this. We want this to be a community project.
Okay, what other resiliency goals does the department have?
So there's a couple things, other things that we're working on. Obviously, the physical infrastructure in the state of Delaware is, why our division was created and what Stephanie and I and partners are working on kind of full time. The other things that we're looking at have to do with equity and how funds are spent moving forward and ensuring that the funds are being done equitably. And also, you may be familiar, the state just got their electric vehicle infrastructure plan approved. AECOM assisted us and DENREC on that. We appreciate that. So we were one of the 35 states that were approved to have this, to get funding for electric vehicles. So basically the decarbonization to the extent we can of transportation is another big thing that our division is working on. Reduction of greenhouse gases is going to be really important moving forward. For not just Delaware, but across the country and across the world. So we're looking at initiatives. Again, kind of like Joe mentioned, there's a lot of money that's available for these programs right now. So it's kind of an ideal time to be in resiliency and sustainability, and develop programs that eventually will help kind of with the reduction of carbons in the air through the greenhouse gases. So that's just a few of them. Physical infrastructure of DelDOT and ensuring our assets are resilient and we can mitigate against them going forward. That's one of our priorities, along with the equity and also the electric vehicle infrastructure program.
Okay, that is all of our questions at this time.
Okay, well, On behalf of the team, I want to thank everybody for their time this evening. We hope that this was informative for you. And if you have friends or family or neighbors that were not able to join for either one of the sessions, again, as Marge referenced, this recordings are going to be uploaded to our website, so you can point folks to that website. That website has not only this information, but it also has contact information and those forms. One of the things that we would love to get community input in is because eventually, as we go to look for future funding, the more we can show that the public has been engaged and is behind this type of a project, that helps us even more. So I believe one of the questions earlier was, what can community members do to help us? Complete those comment forms, submit them, show your support for this project. That will help us as we go after the funding opportunity. So with that, I'm going to say thank you so much again for your time this evening. We'll look forward to the next engagement later on this year or into next year. And if you have any comments or thoughts in the meantime, please feel free to reach out. So thank you so much for your time.